Welcome to 99th Monkey Liberty News for Tuesday, February 25th, 2014. The first article of the day is pertaining to Ukraine. Democracy murdered by protest. Ukraine falls to intrigue and violence. And this article is by Paul Craig Roberts. Interestingly enough, I just saw a headline on InfoWars that states that Ukraine wants a Second Amendment-like gun rights clause written into their new constitution. So that is an interesting development and lends some hope, I would say. You know what, when things are unstable, it was definitely George Soros with evil intent who destabilized Ukraine with his money and using it to back people who stirred things up. But when things are destabilized, sometimes there is an opportunity for people to assert themselves and demand liberty and justice for their nation. And hopefully that can happen in Ukraine. We shall see. I have a few articles about the NSA, what's going on, just perspective. And this is the first of them. This is from Washington's blog. The same high-level U.S. officials who ask us to trust them on protecting the Constitution want to assassinate Snowden without a trial. Do people like this sound like the kinds of people you can trust to not abuse their power? Well, duh, I guess we already knew the answer to that. From Zero Hedge, the conspiracy theory is true. Agents infiltrate websites intending to manipulate, deceive, and destroy reputations. So yeah, it's not your imagine if you have a YouTube channel and you have a bunch of shills who post bizarre stuff. That is really intentional. And manipulate, deceive, and destroy reputations. And of course, just confuse people. A lot of the comments that I've read various places they don't even completely make sense in the context of what's going on. And sometimes I think that sometimes I read a comment that I think is probably just constructed by a computer that can put together sentences based on nouns and verbs and just basic grammatical structure. And interestingly enough, that just puts me in mind, the trivium, the foundation of classical education, the trivium, is grammar, logic, rhetoric. And before you can begin to share ideas, grammar is required as a foundation. We need to be clear on how we are communicating. And I've actually heard people say that English is the easiest language in which to lie, and that there's been some crafting of the English language to make that intentional, that crafting has been intentional to make it easier for people to lie and to be deceptive and get away with it. So keep your antennas up. I mean, I can't say that if you know grammar really well, you won't be able to be fooled by some of these people. It's really the tone and mostly knowing the agenda, knowing the intent that's behind it, understanding what is behind things. And I mentioned that the other day because the cabal is learning how to manipulate us. They can predict when people are fed up with something, and they take that feeling, that sense of frustration, and massage it to achieve, so that it fits in with their agenda, so they achieve their goals based on our momentum. And the more we can understand the intent, what is behind something, the less likely it is that we will be fooled. And there is so much disinfo. We just need to keep our thinking caps on and consider the intent. You know, as Lenin said, to quote Walter in The Dude, as Lenin said, follow the money. No, not John Lennon, the other Lenin. From the 10th Amendment Center, paranoia, surveillance, and military tactics. Have we become enemies of the government? And I'm still in the context of what the NSA does. And, this is a valid question. And there are people who have studied the changes in this country, some of the secret agreements made, the changes in direction having to do with the debt in this country and us becoming collateral for the debt. These agreements have been fraudulently entered into, and because they have removed our sovereignty fraudulently, so it's really not valid, but in practice it's certainly happening, isn't it? Because they've removed our sovereignty, they now consider us enemies of the government. So yes, and it's good to know some of these things and have this understanding so that we can have the correct approach when we are dealing with some of these issues. Here from Blacklisted News, and their source is Washington's blog, NSA is the only federal agency created by secret presidential memo rather than congressional legislation. So again, this is not legitimate. Much of what is going on is not legitimate. If you're a nice person, you like to uphold the law, you like to obey the law. The law here is, much of it is not legitimate because it is done by edict, not through the constitutional channels through which laws are supposed to travel. And if you still trust the government after learning everything you've learned, or if your friends do, this is some information that can really wake people up. This is from Washington's blog. Interview, Game-Changing CAFR Surplus Trillions Explained. Is the California CAFR scandal for real? And this is a 28-minute interview. This is a very significant issue. I bring this up from time to time. It doesn't get a lot of, considering everything else that's going on, this isn't something that we look at a lot. But in understanding taxes and the concept of lack, the idea of lack, that there's not enough, that taxes have to be raised, revenues have to be raised, it's very helpful to understand CAFRs and how we have been manipulated, and how really there's just a lot of money sitting in secret funds that should have been used for the public, but they find excuses not to use it for the people from whom it was collected in taxes. Here's an interesting thought. Corporations received 22,000% return on investment from lobbying. And we always hear about corporations paying for lobbying, people who hover around politicians and buy them gifts and take them to dinners and try to persuade them to vote in ways that benefit their corporation. Well, many people who understand marketing, you know how effective it is to spend money on advertising. Well, this is spectacular. Corporations received 22,000% return on investment from lobbying. And what kinds of things do the lobbyists ask for? Well, from the Daily Caller, bank lobbyists want to raise taxes on 96 million Americans. So, and this even goes back to the coffers, the fact that there are a lot of monies that have been collected in taxes and invested and simply are not available to do what needs to be done for the infrastructure of this country and for the people of this nation. So here's, they're going to make money from, the banks are going to make money, 22,000% return from lobbying. But the bankers, some of the bankers are not doing too well, and God bless their families, and I'm not making light of the banker deaths. But almost every day, there was another one today, and I saw headlines, another banker has been killed. And from Max Kaiser, he had, well, actually, this is the Vatican Project, but Max Kaiser quote, he had them taken out. Lloyd blank find source of banker suicides. And we've been hearing different ideas from different people, although I suspect that they're just different points of view looking at the same story that, of course, Benjamin Fulford wrote in his blog on Monday, that the bankers were being killed so that they could not tell the truth about certain things. Also, there is an implication, because they have a means for, there is a means for actually making money on deaths when people are dying at unexpected ages, that this also helps to fill the coffers, not the CAFR, CAFR, the coffers, the COFFERS, of the people who have these guys insured. So for these people who are enemies of the people and who are killing these bankers, it's a win-win. They get rid of potential whistleblowers, and they make a little money on the deal. From Suzanne Purcell, Climate Engineering, 13 patents explain the chemtrail experiment. This is, I just have this here in case you want to have some talking points, people who don't understand chemtrails. Because really, most days, if they just look up, they will be able to see the evidence that they are being sprayed. And you can use these 13 patents to explain the experiment to them. And they're the guinea pigs. From Washington's blog, liberal politicians launched the idea of free trade agreements in the 1960s to strip nations of sovereignty and hand power over to global corporations. It's not only conservative politicians backing giant multinational corporations over national sovereignty. Yeah, again, they're taking away our sovereignty, not only our individual sovereignty, but our national sovereignty. And they want to strip away our protections and make us a part of this big conglomerate, this seething mass that they can control and receive benefits from the fruits of our labors. I am moving toward good news, and I found this really interesting. 42 state attorneys general support patent reform, and this is from Electronic Frontier Foundation. So people are beginning to make our voices heard and let them know that let the people who can do something about it. So-called patent trolls stifle innovation and harm our economy by making dubious claims of patent infringement and using the threat of expensive litigation to extort money from small businesses and nonprofits. We have received many complaints from these businesses and nonprofits, our constituents, who are desperate for relief from the misuse of the patent system. So there we are. We are making our voices heard, and there are some people, even in government, who will respond. And if enough of us keep making noise, they will be forced to respond. Here's a little bit of noise from Sherry questioning all. Come on, lawyers, learn MERS. Help others and help yourself. Millions can be won from previous foreclosures fraud. And there is a man who has written a book about mortgage fraud and this system, and teaches people how to do the research that is necessary to fight this system and to help people recover and to make sure that their titles are clean so that their homes cannot be fraudulently taken away from them. So I agree with Sherry here, as I typically do. And this is simply an item of interest, maybe to help us understand our history a little bit better, our long history. As above, so below, Australia's Stonehenge and the Great Stone Complex. And interestingly enough, Fritz Springmeier also wrote an article this week, a blog, and Fritz mentioned a lot of ancient structures, ancient cities, ancient wisdom, really, that many of us have been conditioned to not believe in. But Fritz says, there's just obvious facts. And he called the article Humility and Flexibility, which are born of true wisdom. And I believe he called it that because, we need to humble ourselves to some extent, to acknowledge that some of these cities really existed, these cultures really existed, because our history taught us that, basically civilization began with, with England. I mean, I've joked with a lot of people my age and just a lot of Americans, even from other generations, of how extremely limited our history, the history that we've been taught was. And it doesn't go back far enough, it's not deep enough, and for the most part, what we've learned in public education, just going through the 12 grades, there's virtually nothing about China and Japan, some of these amazing, Babylon, ancient civilizations that were actually very advanced. Well, in this article, Fritz goes back even further than that. The various remains of submerged cities are approximately 10,000 years old, well constructed, and appear to have been inundated when the ocean level rose after that ice age. And he gets into some specifics here, very sophisticated design of some of these cities. He says that they had running water and toilets, and many people believe that the pyramids were a means of collecting electricity generated from the magnetic fields of the earth, and perspective. We are not the apex of human civilization, and cultures fall and rise, and I think that even though Fritz hasn't really written about that here, we are in a position now where we can either ascend higher as human beings, or we can go into a new renaissance, or we can fall into greater tragedy and lose what we have and have our lives become more primitive. And certainly it seems that is what the ruling elite have planned for us, because that makes us easier to control, and they want to deny human creativity and human expression, really, that reflects our Creator God. And they do whatever they can to benefit from any creativity that they don't stifle, and leave us with slim pickings. And I'm going to end today by referencing a couple of natural news articles. I have not included many of those lately. I certainly look at them myself, and there has just been so much other news that I have neglected natural news in these videos to some extent over the last week or so. But these caught my eye. EU Chief Scientific Advisor's GMO lies called out in open letter. And I think that's positive, but it's not a resolution. It's just the initiation of bringing more truth to the subject. And this is the good news with which I'll end today, although you can see a lot of other good news here. New hemp plants bred to have increased oleic acid for enhanced cooking properties. And especially for people who are suffering with illnesses that can benefit from some of the chemicals in these plants. This can be, it's helpful to ingest the chemicals as opposed to smoking them. So with that, thank you for tuning in for today's 99th Monkey Liberty News. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Yeah, we may have a difficult road to walk, but we will come into a good place. I'm convinced of it. Hoping that you will love one another, take care, not give up, and insist on liberty.